Hi everyone, welcome back to Talking Sense with Karen and Hayley. Before we make a start today, I just wanted to give you a little bit of news just to warn you, because last week I got a new puppy who is just running around my feet at the moment. So if we get rudely interrupted by a little yap, you will know what it is. She's only 12 weeks old and she's a Shih Tzu cross, but you can imagine what it's like. There's poo and wee everywhere, and there's lots of lots of attention being needed to be given. And this is the first time I've actually recorded a video with her in the room. So let's see how it goes. Me and Karen are crossing my fingers, aren't we, Karen?
We are indeed.
So the topic today, we're going to discuss just the fragrance industry as a whole. And give you an idea of actually how big it is. Because I think when people talk about the fragrance industry, and I say I work in the fragrance industry, everyone automatically goes to fine fragrance. And then they get very surprised when they hear that I work in different areas. And the same with Karen as well. I know Karen doesn't just do personal fragrances, and she's worked in different areas as well. But when you think about fragrance, think about how it started. So if we go all the way back, I don't know how many years, I'm not very good with my timelines and historical timelines, but it's the Egyptian period, and that's what we call the Egyptians as the first perfumers, because they are the ones that really started to use natural materials in their environment to create scents, and they would use them for multiple different things. So for health benefits, for making offerings to gods, etc. And that's where the fragrance industry started. There was trade routes based on where these essential oils were coming from, and they would make small little batches of these fragrances and they would trade them to other parts of the world. And Karen knows a lot more about the processing of these kind of materials with her essential oil background, don't you, Karen?
Yeah. I've got that sort of history of how perfume came about, really, down pat, because it's my bag. I find it all really interesting. You know, I've been working my way through a really oh, look, there's the puppy.
Yeah, I knew she would appear at some point.
I've been working my way through a book called The Silk Road, and it's really all about how perfume and silk opened up the world to trade. Selling those fragrant resins for various religious practices was a major part of it at that time. You can still to this day smell frankincense in churches.
I love frankincense.
I can't speak for other religions if they burn anything in their churches, but it is widely used across religion. And the word perfume actually comes from that practice of burning resins in church. Because it actually, the word is perfumum, which means to create smoke, basically. And that's what they do. So it's like a purifying process. And history shows that the first evidence that humans were using scented herbs for sort of perfuming, it goes right back to 3,000 years BC. There's actually cave drawings in France that show that depict herbs.
Oh wow!
So it's been a practice that we as humans have used for years. Normally, originally to disguise bad odors, as much as to create pleasant smells, or probably more so. I've been reading a series of books recently called Discovery of Witches, which has been made into a TV series, and I think it's brilliant. But in there, there's one of the books, the second book talks about when these characters step back in history, and it shows that floors were routinely strewn with herbs or hay, both to keep floors clean, to deodorize, because they didn't have the sort of hygiene that we have nowadays. So it's and distillation equipment didn't come into play until I think it was 1200 AD. No, sorry, I do know this. Let's go on. Anyway, the guy who invented it, who perfected the technique, is called Ibn Sina, sometimes known as Avicenna in fragrant textbooks. He was the one who perfected distillation, because prior to that, the Egyptians either burned herbs directly, or they fragranced wool from sheep and then squeezed it out, so they would create balms, mainly from lanolin. So it's really, interesting how it all happened. But the real explosion didn't happen until we were talking before we turned on the camera, and Hayley can take over at this point, to the 19th century, when chemistry started to get involved.
Yeah, exactly. So in the 19th century, where basically the chemical industry started to become extremely popular, and that is when the fragrance industry absolutely exploded. Because if you think about it, this is when synthetic chemicals came in. So prior to that, pretty much any fragrance that people were using on their bodies was mainly essential oils. So things from the earth, you get the resins, the florals, the citruses, things like that. But then when science came into play, we were then able to synthesize our own chemicals. So along came the chemists, and they wanted to replicate a particular smell in nature that they couldn't extract, because there's plenty of things in nature that we can't extract, or we can extract, but it doesn't smell quite right. And it's got a lot of impurities, for example. So the chemists started to synthesize a vast amount of odor chemical materials, odor materials, and that absolutely exploded the industry, because you were then able to have a palette that, instead of being quite fairly reasonable, fairly small, to something that was thousands and thousands of raw materials to your disposal. And then, of course, with the industry expanding as a whole, then you had larger distribution centres, you were able to create things at larger volumes, and that probably, you would be looking at like the 40s, the 50s, the 60s. That's when things started to really blow up. And that's also when you started to see fragrances appear in other products much more commonly than just fine fragrance, just personal materials. And a lot of the fragrance houses started a lot earlier than the chemical revolution, we'll call it. And there were small fragrance houses, a lot of them based in the south of France. Is a very popular area. There's a location called Grasse, which I don't think it's as busy in the fragrance industry as it once was, but they were very much in the industry of taking naturals and creating essential oils and trading those out. And then more and more little fragrance houses started to appear. So typically you started off with very individual, unique, what you would probably call artisanal fragrance houses, that they specialised in their own certain materials. So for example, a particular house may just do lavender oil because they're right next to a lavender field, or citrus oils, things like that. But then as the industry got bigger, they saw the choice and the availability of these things becoming much more in demand. These little fragrance houses started to get bigger. So you started to get these bigger organizations. And when you look at the industry now, I mean, you've got a lot of big fragrance houses. And I kind of describe a fragrance house in a similar way to a fashion house, because I think people tend to get it a bit more, because fashion's a bit more ingrained into society from understanding point of view. So a fragrance house is essentially a company that you would approach to get fragrance materials from, or finished fragrances. And you've got a lot out there. I mean, before I entered the industry, I just kind of thought that fragrance was, I think I mentioned this on the first video, that it was just really small. I just didn't get it. I didn't understand that there was a whole industry behind it. I just thought people would maybe just go to a shop and buy a fragrance and then put it onto their product. But I mean, there's some huge ones out there. The biggest one at the moment is Givaudan, it's an amazing house. I've worked with them for many years. But they probably, I think they've got around about, if I'm recalling correctly, about 20 to 25% of the market share for fragrances. So that is absolutely huge when you think of it, because it's $1 billion industry. And it's not just, as we mentioned, fine fragrance. Sorry, my dogs are having a fight next to me, so I'm trying. It's not just the fine fragrances were mentioned, and I think I remember reading something about fine fragrance on its own is worth like $100 billion. But then when you think of all the extra pieces added onto that, so you've got like laundry and home care and everything like that added on top of it, it's $1 billion business. And the fact that Givaudan have got 20 to 25%, somewhere around that, of that business, it's absolutely massive. You've also got houses such as Firmenich, IFF, Man, Simrise, Fruit Arome, Takasago. These are all houses that I've worked with, and I love them all. I think they're all fantastic, and typically they've got two different areas to them, from a finished product standpoint. So you'll have your fragrance portion of it. You'll also have your flavour portion. We'll ignore the flavour portion for now because we're not talking about flavours, but they've got a huge fragrance organisation, and within that fragrance organisation, they'll have finished fragrances, which is what they sell to other companies, so sell to manufacturers. Then they also have ingredients. So they'll be selling things such as dihydromercenol, hedione, orange essential oil, things like that they will also sell to other companies to make finished products. And they're absolutely huge. I mean, some of them, Givaudan in particular, when I'm thinking of, they've got R&D sites, they've got marketing, they've got regulatory, they've got sales teams, they've got so many groups within that one organisation. And even Givaudan has their own perfumery school. So you've probably heard the whole, there's less less perfumers in the world than there is astronauts. I don't know whether that's still true or not, but I think probably it is. They're not a few and far between, but now you've got the rise of the independent perfumer, such as Karen, as yourself. But being training to become a perfumer can take many, many years. And Givaudan is one of the only fragrance houses who have their own perfumery school. And it's a very prestigious school. You can join there, but I think, if I remember rightly, again, I think they only intake about 2 or 3 people a year to be trained in the perfumery school. So it's very, very select. It's probably harder to get into Givaudan perfumery school than it is to get on a NASA training program in that respect. But yeah, so you've got these big, massive organizations, but over the past few years, you've had a much higher rise in small artisanal independent perfumers, because when you think about fragrance as a whole, you've not only got these big perfume houses, you've also got brands and designers, so things like Marc Jacobs, Tom Ford, D&G, things like that they've got their own fragrance houses. Not all of them might go to a separate fragrance house. Some of them have their own internal perfumers, but then also people like yourself, Karen, as well. I mean, how did you train again? You went to an independent lady training for you, didn't you?
Yeah, I went to. I started off as an aromatherapist, so I went to a private school that was run by the daughter of the lady who writes most of the aromatherapy textbooks that serve complementary therapists around the world now. And that was really enjoyable. That was about 14 years ago. So I was practicing as an aromatherapist for just over 11 years when I had the opportunity to go on a perfume course again with an independent school. It was called an intensive professional intensive perfumery course, and it lasted for 3 weeks, but that was divided into two. So there was a foundation week that you had to do to be able to go on to the next 2 weeks, and it really was intensive. And I think the biggest difference for between that and the likes of Givaudan is time. So much practical application of using perfume ingredients was piled into my course, whereas in formal perfumery training, I think you could spend up to a year doing nothing but learning to identify fragrances by smell, not by label.
Yeah.
But I suppose it depends what you want, because a lot of fragrance houses actually keep their perfumers in the dark about the ingredients they're using, so they'll have codes on the label, so the formula is written using a code rather than the name of the ingredients, so that the perfumers can't steal them,
it's very true. Because I mean, I when I worked for P&G, because P&G is it is the only manufacturer who has their own internal perfumery capability. So you'll have internal perfume experts at some of the manufacturers, but P&G are the only ones that have got their own internal perfumers. So I was lucky enough to get a lot of training by perfumers themselves. And it's exactly like that. They'll do everything blind up to a certain point. So you will assess raw materials blind, so you don't know what they're giving you, and you've got to guess based off the olfactive profile what material it is, and then they start to build it up. So they'll add a few materials together, making a code, and then you've got to break it down and say these materials are then in it, and then they build it up to more complex fragrances, and then after you start to just familiarize with themselves, then they'll start letting you mix things. So it's a lengthy, really lengthy, in-depth process where it's basically training your brain to recognize every piece within the formulation, every building block. It's very intensive, but they do, like you say, do it over a much longer period of time, and do like to keep things very blind and very if you're evaluating things, like when I evaluated things for consumer tests or any quality checks or anything like that, it would be blind, and as a trained evaluator, we'll both know we can be very we can put our personal feelings to one side and we can break it down and understand, is it right or is it not? But even then, they would still take that sight away from you, because it is the best way to evaluate, is to do things blind and not to have that sway of either the name of it or the context of the product or anything like that. I've got my other dog now joining in.
He's only a puppy too, though, isn't he?
Yeah, he was just 1 on Monday. Weren't you, boy? Yeah. So my life is like a circus at the moment. You can imagine what my house is like. This bit looks quite neat and tidy. If you look to the other way, it's absolutely dire at the moment. But yeah, 2 kids, a husband, a cat, and 2 puppies. I've let myself in for it, haven't I, Karen? But but yeah, so to sum up, it's from the outside looking in, you would probably think it's quite small, and I'm putting myself back 15 years ago before I joined the industry. I just thought there was probably one place that everyone would go and buy their fragrances, but it's not. It's absolutely massive. It's $1 billion industry, and you have massive corporate fragrance houses out there that will have different subsects and work with lots of different manufacturers to create their perfumes, down to the small independent perfumeries who create only for one particular brand, and then even down to independent perfumers such as yourself, Karen, who will only do things for certain types of products or certain types of fragrances as well. So there's some perfumers who will only do essential oils and they will not mix synthetic materials in there. So you've got a huge raft of people that work in the fragrance industry. And even though in the first video we said it is quite small, it is. Compared to the other industries in the world, it is quite small, and everyone tends to know everyone. And you bump into people time and time again. But when you look at the value of it and the impact of it, it is absolutely massive. And it's only grown because the artisanal and the niche trend that has been quite popular for many years now, it's only grown. When you look at the stats and how much, not just in fine fragrance I'm talking about here, but in consumer products, if you look at your shelf next time you go to the supermarket, you will see, as an example, fabric softeners, Comfort and Lenore. You've got your normal Comfort and your normal Lenore, which are the blue ones that have been around for many years. But then you look and they've got the Perfume Deluxe collection. They've got all these different formats coming out. And that's really showing you that the artisanal niche sector is huge. And yeah, it probably did start in the fine fragrance industry. Most things do in the fragrance world. And it trickles its way down. But sometimes you see trends dying out. This one's not. It's only getting bigger. So I would expect that the industry as a whole is just going to get bigger because there's so many more people coming out and creating their own new brands and their own new ways of perfumery that'll add extra to the palette of fragrance. And I think that's really exciting. I don't know about you, Karen, but I get really excited thinking about all the different things that can come from this, because it's not just the big conglomerates and the big corporates that are leading this. A lot of the trends and a lot of the things that are twisting the way the industry is are coming from the smaller independent groups, which is really exciting.
Yeah, I'm with you there. It's exciting seeing how the industry is changing, because it did used to be, a very, very closed, secretive industry, and those barriers are coming down almost on a daily basis. Sometimes it feels like when you read some of the articles. I'm thinking, what we were saying before about how fragrance used to be made and how it's now made. You used to have these tiny perfume houses and people would go to certain shops to buy their fragrance because that shop owner was the perfumer and he made his fragrances. But even then, it wasn't the same from year to year, because natural ingredients can be affected by, the altitude that the crop was grown at, the weather that year, the soil that they come from. So you can have thyme from the bottom of a mountain that's grown in a relatively rich soil, and thyme from the top of the exact same plant genus grown at the top of the mountain with much purer sunlight and clearer air and more soil starved, and the smell will make them completely different when you have them side by side. So so many different factors can make a difference in natural perfumery. And so that's, like, for me, that's one of the nice things about the standardization of fragrance as brought about by the chemical companies. But sometimes it's nice to have that variation, and I like to compare the variation in wines, in essential oils, to the variation that can happen in wines. Because it's a movable feast, because it's affected by nature. It's a natural product that's affected by nature, and that in itself is a nice thing. But again, it's a very niche market where customers need to be prepared to tolerate those variances and to learn to enjoy them rather than seeing them as faults. So it's nice that there's this so much different input now into the fragrance industry, because at one time the chemicals almost wiped out the natural fragrance industry during the 70s, for example, when I think it was Coty rose to prominence. I'm not sure which big house owned them, but all the fragrances started to smell the same, because there were these massive advances in things that perfumery houses could make that were affordable. So all of a sudden, fragrance was not just limited to like elite luxury purchases that you could only get for your birthday, and you'd have to ask somebody to start saving on your current birthday in order to get it the next birthday because it's so dear. So just, you know, fragrance has become so much more accessible, and as you say, it's in everything now. It's you know, going back to the days, Tudor times, when herbs and hay was strewn on the floor to create a pleasant smell and mask unpleasant smells. You know, we're now doing a similar thing, but using chemicals to clean our houses and keep them sterile. But we don't want them to smell like a hospital, so we need nice fragrances in them. So it is fascinating if you actually stop and think how far fragrance has permeated into our lives.
Yeah.
Right down, in fact, to a little anecdote that I learned way back in my aromatherapy. No, it wasn't it. Way back in my studies, when we were talking about when I went on my perfumery course. I went there specifically because I wanted to learn how to cope with the chemical variances caused by the base products that I wanted to put my fragrances into. So how do you adjust that, and you know what molecular bonds are responsible for it. But one of the subjects we were talking about was you know, the rise of fragrance in the home cleaning industry, for example, because one of the people on my course actually had a cleaning products business. He made the concentrates of he was an independent company, but in his country he made the equivalent of like Cif that you clean a countertop with, and floor cleaners. And he was obsessed with the idea of making a mango fragrance. That mango is a really difficult one to make because a lot of the base ingredients in that can come together to create a sulfurous compound. So he was having fun and games like in his own world, but that led us to a conversation about the home care industry. We were talking about how much the fragrance industry has actually affected other industries around the world. And the particular example that was given was that there was a cleaning product invented that actually neutralized odors. And it was fantastic. It was like magic. It literally encapsulated bad smells and made them disappear. So there was no smell. And the company that invented this product thought they really had like the sort of the flying carpet to end all flying carpets, and that they were going to smash the competition and rule the world. So they brought this product out, and it didn't sell. People bought it, but they didn't repeat purchase. So they brought in this guy who was an advertising guru, and this was way back when advertising was still, you know, a fairly new science. And they tried all sorts of things to get this product to sell, and nothing was working. People would go and buy it because when they became aware of it and they were interested, but they just couldn't get the repeat purchases. So they started to do these studies, and they decided they'd do like they'd observe housewives in action to see what was happening when they were doing their standard housework routine, and what was the difference when they gave them this product that got rid of odors. So you're talking, you know, this was way back in the 40s, I think it was. So you're talking, they targeted mums with sporty children in particular, you know, smelly boys. And I can say that because I've got two boys. They're very clean, but, you know, PE kits and stuff like that are left in bags for too long, and socks under the bed and all that. They do generate their own particular odour. So they watched these women doing the housework, and what they would do, this was, you know, back in the days when it was women who did the housework. So, you know, I'm not being sexist here, I'm talking about a particular moment in time. So these housewives would go, they would do the work, they'd tidy up the bedrooms, straighten the beds, put toys away, put things where they belonged, and they, you know, do the polishing and dusting, and then as they left the room they would spray air freshener. And when they gave them, so the next day they would watch them again, and they'd do it with the odorless air freshener, which would leave the room completely smell free and clean, but not clean smelling. This was the difference. And what they noticed when they were doing this study was, in watching the housewife doing this work, when she sprayed the air freshener, her micro expression, she would do a micro smile to herself, like a satisfied, job done smile. When she sprayed the odorless product, that smile didn't happen. So that told them that the fragrance element was important. So they had to take their odorless odor neutralizer and add a fragrance to it in order for it to have the effect of bringing a smile to somebody's face. And once they did that, then the product took off. And I'm actually talking about Febreze, which is, an internationally known name. There are other odor neutralizers now, but that's the story of Febreze. So they had this fantastic product that didn't smell of anything and didn't leave any residual scent behind, but it didn't give people happiness.
Yeah. It's such a good example of, basically, isn't it, why people continue to buy, because that's why I say fragrance is so important, because people who are making products don't necessarily think of fragrance. It comes a little bit further on, and they just think, I'll just put a fragrance in later on. But the fragrance is what makes your product powerful. I've run so many consumer tests in my time where if you don't get the fragrance right, people don't buy it. Or I've been sitting down with consumers that'll say, I don't want a fragrance in my product. And then you're like, okay, wonderful. And you'll give them a fragrance product, and then actually they hate it, they don't like it. And as soon as you add fragrance in there, that is what drives passion. That is what drives the love for the product. And that's what drives repeat purchase. That's what makes your brand iconic. It's so, so powerful. And it's nice to see that people are starting to understand it more, even from when I first joined. When I joined Procter & Gamble in 2005, I remember sitting in meetings trying to convince people that you needed to invest properly in the fragrance to get an overall win that they wanted. And then some people would say, not so sure. But over time, I mean, the people that had worked in Procter for a long time were very well aware of this, and it's been very well ingrained in their society. That's why they have internal perfumers. They understand the power of it. But whenever you would work with new people coming into Procter, they just wouldn't understand it. So I would often get into debates about, no, we need to invest properly in the fragrance. And the results would always come back the same, because I would manage to niggle in a higher cost leg for fragrance. And without doubt, the one that had the better quality fragrance in always won. And it's just so powerful. But I'm not having those conversations as much now. Now fast forward to 2019 now, goodness me. And people are grasping the power of fragrance. I mean, I'm going to start working with Newcastle University, and they're going to start running a research program about understanding the psychology of scent and how it drives people to buy and how people can use that in their marketing. So it's like there's loads of stuff coming out now, and people are understanding it more. So when you think about it as a whole, for thousands of years, fragrance was used in a particular way. It didn't vary much. Different cultures used it in slightly different ways, and some new things may have come along the line, but not very long. For thousands of years, it was pretty much used for the same thing. When you think of the last 100 years, like, wow, like the change that's happened in it, it's completely flipped the industry. So when you think, like, what's going to be the next 100 years, it's the same with technology, isn't it? Like the expansions just suddenly went. So think of the next 100 years, like, where's it going to be? And there's so many exciting things. There's like technology and everything that the fragrance can go into. There's like so many exciting things, but we can do that on another video, because I can imagine we'd be talking for hours if we started to talk about the future of fragrance. But yeah, so I hope that's given you an appreciation of kind of where the industry started back in the days where we're distilling products in the Egyptian times, and up until now where there's huge amount of money invested in this. It's a massive business, and it's only going to get bigger. So we're on a journey here, and I'm sure we'll be sharing lots of new things that come out, because there's new things coming out every single day when it comes to fragrances, that we can share with you. So we'll take you on that journey with us. But if there's anything else that you want us to talk about in particular, like Karen mentioned about the Febreze thing there, if you want to talk about that technology, which it's called beta cyclodextrin, I think it is. But if you want us to talk about things like that, or any particular products that are out in the market, just let us know in the comments, or send us a message as well, and we'll happily talk about it for you. As you can tell, we can talk for days on fragrance, and hopefully you find it interesting. So yeah, let us know if there's anything specific, and we'll see you on the next video.